Okay, we're ready to go. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Dennis Normile. I'll be the MC this afternoon. Before we get started, please join me in the usual routine of making sure that your mobile phones are turned off or on manner mode so we don't disturb our speaker. Our speaker this afternoon has a very long and distinguished career in studying the effects of radiation on human health. He is a former advisor to WHO and has served in many both public and private capacities at various universities and advising various international organizations on the effects of radiation on human health. He is in Japan to speak at a two-day symposium that takes place on Sunday and Monday. The Citizen Scientist International Symposium on Radiation Protection. I think everybody has gotten a handout on this if you're interested in attending. He has also just published a critique of the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation report on the effects of Fukushima that was published earlier this year. His critique appeared in English in the October issue of Kagaku magazine. I think this was handed out as well. Did everybody get a copy of that? If not, it's available online, and I can give you the link later. And his description of the shortcomings of that report and the effort by UNSCEAR to address the health effects of Fukushima will be the topic of his talk this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Keith Baverstock.
Well, thank you, Mr. Moderator, for that kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation to come and present here. I guess I just... Oh, I'll do it with this. No. Do you know how I make the slide go forward? With that one. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, I want to start this presentation by saying a few words about lessons learned from a previous nuclear power plant accident, namely the one in Chernobyl in 1986. Now, I'm a public health scientist and I've been interested in nuclear accidents since 1971. My program at the World Health Organization in 1992 was instrumental in uncovering the outbreak of childhood thyroid cancer caused by exposure to radioactive iodine after the Chernobyl accident. Notwithstanding the seriousness of that health outcome, I would still say that the most damaging feature of the Chernobyl accident was what became known as the psychosocial effect. At its root, the psychosocial effect is about trust. Trust in the authorities whose job it is to protect public health. At the time of the Chernobyl accident, the authorities in the Soviet Union did not disclose the full facts concerning the extent of the accident at the outset, and as a consequence, they lost the trust of the public when the true situation became clear. The psychosocial effect is therefore preventable. After the Chernobyl accident, the United Nations organizations, the World Health Organization, International Labour Organization, Food and Agricultural Organization, the United Nations Children's Fund, and the United Nations Development Programme, and the International Atomic Energy Agency developed legally binding frameworks specifically to protect public health in the event of future nuclear accidents, both from the pathological effects, cancer, etc., of radioactivity, and the psychosocial effects. The international organizations, therefore, with the consent of their member states, undertook a role in protecting public health alongside national programs. The protection framework was firmly based on scientific principles and scientific evidence. The role of the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiations, UNSCEAR, although not an active party in the public health protection framework I've just described, stands in a kind of supervisory role in terms of authenticating the scientific basis for the framework. It also provides an assessment of the levels of radioactivity and risks of exposure to radioactivity following a major accident. Now, given the importance of the psychosocial effect, UNSCEAR has a special obligation to be timely, transparent, comprehensive, independent, and truly scientific in this important task. My criticism of UNSCEAR is that it has been none of these things, and most importantly, it has not taken a scientific approach. So I will briefly outline my criticisms under the headings I've just given you. So timeliness. UNSCEAR did not publish its report for more than 3 years after the accident. In fact, it published it in April this year, although it is called the 2013 UNSCEAR report, and then only in a partially completed form. In fact, I believe there are still remaining parts to be published. In my view, that is one of the reasons why it has taken UNSCEAR so long. It is, in my view, one of the reasons why it has taken UNSCEAR so long is that the United Nations Public Health Protection Framework, under the leadership of IAEA, did not function initially. Indeed, it seems that there was an interval of at least 3 to 4 days before the framework started to function. For whatever reason, the 2013 UNSCEAR report was too late to be effective in mitigating any potential psychosocial effect. Transparency. The UNSCEAR report fails on transparency, in my view, on the grounds that the failure of the IAEA-led public health protection framework, which is at its most important in the earliest hours after the accident, is not referred to at all in the report, although it must have severely limited the extent to which the risks could be assessed. That an emergency framework was developed and led by the now Secretary of UNSCEAR. He has acknowledged to me how serious that failure was from the point of view of the UN organization. UNSCEAR know my views. They have seen this report in its draft form. And they claim that their remit extends only to reporting on the levels and risks of exposure to radioactivity. Other aspects they regard as political or not scientific. Others may regard that attitude as being protective of the interests of other UN organizations that they might otherwise have to criticize. Comprehensiveness. The difficult part of a radiation risk assessment after a nuclear accident is to determine the doses in the very early hours of the period in which the releases occur. The exposure route here, in addition to external radiation, is from immersion in the radioactive cloud and internal irradiation from inhalation and, to some extent, ingestion. It is necessarily an imprecise process, relying on sporadic measurements and modeling based to some extent on knowledge of the source term. Had the emergency preparedness plan worked, there would have been the possibility of international assistance to gather dosimetric data in the early days of the accident. It also appears that some monitoring data from in situ suspended particle monitors was available, but not used by UNSCEAR. One has to include that UNSCEAR preferred not to estimate these doses, and to this extent their report is not comprehensive, and the reader is left in a state of ignorance about the early exposures and the risks they might entail. Independence. What is crucial to a risk assessment such as that prepared by UNSCEAR is that it is independent of those who might have a vested interest in the outcome. Here UNSCEAR fails on several counts. Firstly, its members are nominated overwhelmingly by national governments with nuclear power programs that have high economic importance, and those same governments also provide funds to UNSCEAR. It is clear that UNSCEAR has at least a potential conflict of interest in that it may serve the needs of its benefactors, presently 27 nations, at the expense of non-nuclear nations, and there are currently 193 member nations in the UN, many of whom are potentially subject to fallout in the event of nuclear accidents, without, incidentally, getting the economic benefits of nuclear power. UNSCEAR could have published the CVs of its members, including their publication records in the field of risk assessment, along with signed statements declaring any conflicts of interest, such as employment in the nuclear industry. This is a standard procedure for the United States National Academy of Sciences in similar circumstances. What is notable to me, as someone with a long-term experience in the field of radiation risk assessment, is that few researchers that have been critical of the nuclear industry and the nuclear lobby are involved in the preparation of the UNSCEAR report. Crucial to the estimation of doses in the early period of the accident is the so-called source term. This is the amount of radioactivity of different isotopes released from the stricken reactors. As 3 cores melted and produced several plumes of radioactivity over more than a week, these are very important and complex sources of risk. Of several estimates of the source term available to UNSCEAR, they chose to use one published by the Japan Atomic Energy Agency, raising the question of whether this organization is independent of the owners of the nuclear reactors, TEPCO, or any other party with a vested interest in the consequences of the accident. The Japan Atomic Energy Agency source term was the lowest among several estimates of releases. For example, its value for the isotope cesium-137 is 6 times lower than that of an international group. To date, the UN agencies have produced 3 reports on the Fukushima accident, 2 by the World Health Organization and 1 by UNSCEAR. I am told a 4th is about to be published by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. However, it would be wrong to assume that these 4 reports have been prepared independently of one another. At a recent international symposium in Fukushima City, a senior management staff member of the WHO claimed that the UN agencies collaborated closely in making health outcome risk estimates. So, none of these reports are independent of one of the other. Finally, I come to my most major and important criticism, because the S in UNSCEAR stands for Scientific, United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiations. A truly scientific report, such as might have been produced by the US National Academy of Sciences, would be all the things that I have listed: timely, transparent, comprehensive, independent of all vested interests. And so my foremost criticism of the UNSCEAR report is that it doesn't qualify, as UNSCEAR claims, as a scientific document. In fact, The report shows many features that can be interpreted as downplaying the importance of the accident from the public health perspective. I showed UNSCEAR my criticisms before they were published, and they have had the opportunity to publish, as I suggested, the CVs and publication records of its members. It has failed so far to do that. So finally, just to point out one example where I think it's lacking in scientific rigor, I draw attention to the UNSCEAR's own press release with the headline, "Increase in Cancer Unlikely Following Fukushima Exposure," says UN report. But we don't have to go far into the report. In fact, to page 74, and we find a distribution of worker doses is provided for the 1.5 years after the accident. A rough estimate from this diagram gives a total dose to some 10,000 workers with doses above 10 millisieverts. And using the basis of standard risk factors, this amounts to some 50 excess cancers over the lifetimes of those workers. Now that is only for the first 1.5 years of the working time. Also, UNSCEAR's estimate for the total Japanese population, the public collective dose, for the first year of the accident is 18,000 person-sieverts, and that is between 2,500 and 3,000 excess cancers over the remainder of the lifetimes of those people. This is on the basis of our best knowledge of the risks from exposure to radiation, and these are not unlikely cancers, but cancers that are to be expected. They may never be identified as in specific individuals as a Fukushima-caused cancer, but they will occur. In the same way that we can't identify cancers from secondary smoking. It would be inexcusable for a scientific body to represent its own findings in this way. So I come to my conclusion. It has not satisfied, this report has not satisfied the primary requirements of a scientifically sound risk assessment. It is not timely, it is not transparent, it's not comprehensive, it's not independent of vested interests, and therefore it's not qualified to be called scientific. The United Nations many of the UN nations do not have nuclear power generation facilities themselves, but they would suffer from the effects of fallout from those that do, were the climatic conditions appropriate. And they need an independent scientific assessment of the Fukushima accident. And my advice to the UN would be that they should commission one, but that they should also dissolve the UNSCEAR committee. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move right into Q&A. Please come to the front, identify yourself. And we have someone providing simultaneous translation, so speak slowly so she can keep up with us. Name and affiliation, please.
My name is Hiroyuki Fujita. I'm a Kokumin Shimbun newspaper editorial writer. I'm not a scientist, but I'm an associate member of Scientists for Accurate Radiation Information. Yeah. Dr. Wade Allison, Professor Emeritus of Oxford University, is one of the scientist members. Now, according to him, for example, so-called low-dose radiation, let's say 100 millisievert or less, not so bad for human health, according to the scientific research. And all the scientific knowledge rooted on the experiment of the fruit fly, as you know, perhaps. So your understanding of or observation scientifically is not valid according to the let's say Sally's understanding. So how would you comment on this line of argument?
Yeah, I can certainly comment on that, no problem at all. Wade Allison, do you know what his scientific expertise is? Physics.
40 years.
Yes, 40 years of physics.
Yeah.
Not public health, not medicine, not biology. So, yes, Wade Allison is a very highly respected person, I gather. He was the master of Keble College at one time. He's written a book on radiation, and I did a review of that book for the journal called Lancet in the UK. They didn't publish the review because I said this book was highly entertaining and would find a place on any shelf of fiction books. It is fiction, that book. His idea that biology can be likened to, well, I think he used the Forth Bridge. Do you know about the Forth Bridge?
Could you explain for the sake of
The Forth Bridge is a bridge across the River Forth in Scotland, and it is long enough that painting it takes around 4 years to complete from one end to the other, so it is then necessary to go back to the other end and start painting again. So they are forever painting the Forth Bridge, and it has lasted a long time, and it has withstood a lot of weather. And this is Allison's model for biology, that a biological system can withstand a lot of small events, but not very large ones. So painting is, you don't need to do anything structural to the Forth Bridge to keep it there. You only need to paint it, and then it won't rust away. But if a big storm came, it would demolish the bridge. Well, biology is not like that. Biology is much, much more complex. And we don't have to rely on work on fruit flies to know what the effects of radiation are. We know what they are on human health. We have a lot of epidemiological information, which he ignores. I think the man is dangerous. I think you are putting yourself in a dangerous position if you believe him. I volunteered to him in an email to have a debate with him in Oxford, and he didn't think that was necessary. So perhaps I think you know where he stands. He's a crank.
Thank you.
Okay. Further questions? Peter?
Langan at Bloomberg News. This question might be stupid, but I'll ask it anyway. I read, and I can't find the source again, that one of the arguments from the pro-nuclear lobby is that man has evolved with radiation, natural radiation, background radiation, and hence the fears of radiation exposure are exaggerated, and that we've, as I say, evolved and have a natural protection, if you like, to it. But my understanding, and again, this is perhaps the stupid question, during a nuclear explosion or the generation of power from a nuclear reaction, that it creates man-made isotopes that we haven't evolved with, and hence present another type of danger. Could you just clarify that point?
Yeah, I think it's true that we have evolved to live in a world that has levels of radiation. And what we see is that if we look at the cancer incidence in relation to radiation dose in areas of habitual high background, we don't find an excess of cancer. If you compare high background with a low background, normal background area, the high background area doesn't have an excess of cancer, and that might be because they have become adapted to a higher level of radiation. And that's probably true, but it probably took 10, 20 generations. So when you, on today's generation, suddenly increase the amount of radiation, then the organisms, the people or animals in the environment are not adapted to that. And what we have seen around Chernobyl and what we have seen around Fukushima is damage to the wildlife. We have seen the bluegrass butterfly damaged. We have seen the swallows damaged around Chernobyl. And this looks to be very much like radiation damage that we would expect if we were to examine it in the laboratory. So I think the idea that we will adapt overnight to higher levels of radiation is a false one, and that it will take some time, maybe 10 generations, which you could see in butterflies maybe, but we're looking at 300 years to see it in human beings. So I don't agree that it's relevant to nuclear accidents. I think it's true, but I don't think it's relevant to nuclear accidents. Now, what you say about isotopes or nuclides like plutonium, that may well be true. I think there are people who say that they present a risk for which the body has, or the human organism has not adapted. When I try and explain this, I use the example of people arriving at an airport with luggage. The system has a limit to how much luggage it can handle. And if everybody brings between 1 and 2 cases, the whole system functions completely normally. But if one day everybody turned up with 5 cases, I bet the system would break down pretty rapidly, because it wasn't designed to deal with every passenger bringing 5 suitcases. So that is the way biology works, that it spends a certain amount of energy to protect against threats at the cellular level, to protect against threats, using very expensive, in terms of resources for running the cell, in repair and detection processes for damage. But it doesn't overdo it so that you could put 10 times as much damage in. And that's why I think we have a problem with radiation-induced effects, because we haven't adapted to those higher levels.
Christoph?
Süddeutsche Zeitung, Neidhardt. Two questions, if I may. First, cattle in the Fukushima area displays white spots, often near the neck. Do you have any, and it's pretty obvious that they didn't display these white spots before the nuclear accident, so it's pretty obvious that it's somehow connected. Do you have any theory? I mean, there must be a genetic defect, but do you have any more detailed theory how these white spots appear? And the second question is, we know of quite a few scientists in Japan who have findings that could not be published. We know one case, a specific, at the MRI, the Meteorological Institute in Tsukuba. But there are other scientists, but they don't come forward, so we don't know who they are. Do you have any idea whose works have been suppressed? Thanks.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to say no to both those questions. I am not an animal physiologist or geneticist, and I don't know why radiation should produce anything as specific as white spots. But I would need to know a lot more, I think. Probably I couldn't answer it even then. You probably need to take that question to a biologist more in that area. And no, I don't know about work that cannot be published here. I haven't come across that myself. But then I don't spend that much time here.
Yes, Daniel.
Hi, I'm Daniel Scanasi, a freelance journalist from Switzerland. You criticize a lot UNSCEAR in your report, but what do you think of the WHO that has an agreement with IAEA on not discussing the radiation effects on humans?
Yes, this agreement has, this is a common kind of agreement that every UN agency or organization reaches with all its other agencies which might work in a similar area or on a similar problem. Personally, I've had a lot of experience. I worked for 13 years inside the WHO, and I worked with the IAEA on some projects during that period. There is no problem with working at the technical level between the two organizations. People at my level, without managerial responsibility, get on fine, and we use our expertise in a collegiate way. But when it comes to issues of policy which concern nuclear energy, then there comes a problem. And it's nothing really to do with that agreement. It's to do with the fact that, let's put it this way, on a subject like radiation, the IAEA has a lot more money to spend than WHO. And therefore, WHO's effort is bound to be a lot less. And in the upper levels of management, it seems that WHO managers would agree, if you like, with the policy of another agency rather than listen to the technical expertise of their own staff. And that happens in other areas as well. And it is a big distorting factor. I don't know whether you saw. There was an international symposium at Fukushima City a few months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, and the WHO spokesman there more or less said that the WHO had to take account of the economic aspects of nuclear power when deciding what was reasonable in terms of public health protection. That statement horrified and amazed me. It's not her job to look after the economic health of the nuclear power industry. It's her job to look after the public health of the population. So there is confusion there, and it seems to persist. The WHO the IAEA impeded the publication of the guidelines on iodine prophylaxis to prevent children on exposure to iodine-131 developing thyroid cancer, based on what we learned from the Chernobyl accident. And the IAEA, after cooperating to produce those guidelines, withdrew their support and then tried to stop the WHO from publishing them. So these call themselves brothers and sisters among the UN nations. They fight and squabble just as normal brothers and sisters do, as well as cooperate.
Okay, next. Yes, down here.
NHK の亀谷と言います。So, yeah, I'm gonna use. Yeah, I'm NHK の亀谷と言います。
How do I turn this on? あ、thank you.
私は NHK の、亀谷と言います。私はその福島原子力発電所の事故の後にですね、その作業員の、 労務管理とかですね、あと放射性物質の拡散について、取材をしてきたんですけども、事故後直後からですね、その作業員の労務管理というのは非常にずさんだと言われてきて、本人たちの証言も含めてなんですけども、それで彼らがどれだけ洗礼を浴びたかということはあまり分かっていないと。で本人たちもよく分かっていないと。でただ今後、先生おっしゃるようにですね、がんの発症する確率は非常に高いと。で過去にどうだったかということをもう今から調べるのは非常に難しいと考えたときに、彼らのその健康管理を、これからどうしていけばいいかということをまずお伺いしたいことです。あと、例えば子どもたちの場合、その時に被爆した可能性がある子どもたちが大人になった時にがんが発症したと。その時にどういうものを残しておいたり、どういう、例えばよく言われるのが歯に蓄積したセシウムを残しておけば、その後にそれががんに発症した、証言になるとかっていう話も伺いますし、あとそれがまた質問です。また、今後、日本では原子力発電所がまた再稼働するというふうに言われています。でまた仮に事故が起こった場合にどういった緊急対策とか、どういう対策を講じていくことがいいのか教えてください。よろしくお願いします。
Okay, for the first question, it is inconceivable that the workers could handle that accident without considerable exposures and without the appropriate consequences in terms of health, and that would be cancer and possibly non-cancer diseases. Also, the children, these are mostly male workers, so the children of these workers should be followed up. So there should be registers of people who worked with their doses, and they should be traceable through their registers. I don't think in general, unless the exposures are very high, it is necessary to have medical supervision, only to be able to assess when they exhibit a cancer or some other disease which might be appropriate. I would say circulatory disease would be one thing to be added to cancer for the adults. The children of the workers should be followed as well, and there should be a register of those and the dose that their parents received and which of their parents was the worker, the exposed worker. And they should be followed for birth defects and cancers and perhaps even other diseases as well. And the only thing that you can do, there is no way of looking at a person and saying he's a likely candidate to have a cancer. It's just not possible to do that until the cancer is diagnosable, until you have symptoms. So cesium on the teeth is a fairy tale. It's not solid evidence for anything. But it is going to be important to have those registers set up now, because it becomes very much more difficult in the future to trace those people. As for the emergency response in the case of a future accident, of course, it is the national responsibility to maintain that emergency system. And it is a national responsibility for those who've signed up to it to cooperate with the United Nations and the IAEA in particular. So I would say it's a question for many national authorities, not just Japan, and for the United Nations organizations, and particularly the IAEA, to put back the wheels on the broken system that this accident has revealed. Now, I am no longer working in the United Nations system, so I don't know whether any progress is being made on that. But I do know that in some European countries, they have been looking at their nuclear emergency response plans and appropriately modifying them in the light of what took place in Fukushima.
Further questions? Yes, Kurt?
Yeah, my name is Kurt Sieber. I'm an associate member. In connection with a recent drill in Niigata about the a nuclear power accident, there have been some differences of opinion between the governor, Izumida, who, by the way, was also here some time ago, and the central government as far as the distribution of potassium iodine pills are concerned. Izumida said they should be distributed immediately because that they can be used when they are needed. The government, the central government said that they should only be distributed after an accident has happened and only in those areas which are really strongly contaminated. Please clarify for the benefit of the Japanese government what's the correct answer to that, because it is generally known that if you take these pills more than 8 hours after the accident has happened or the contamination has started to happen, the efficiency is going down at a very, very rapid pace. Yeah. I should like to add in this context, I'm also from Switzerland, by the way, that Switzerland is just right now distributing iodine pills to 4.3 million households with the instructions how to take them, and there is a big controversy going on because it was not, the instructions were not published in about 10 different languages. Thank you.
Yes, well, I'm very glad to hear that Switzerland has finally decided to pre-distribute the tablets, because that is the really only effective way of using these iodine tablets. They should be in the houses of people, in schools, in hospitals, and any place where they might be needed. They are only needed by children. They are not needed by adults. Children are very many times more sensitive to the effects of radiation on the thyroid than adults. So yes, it is pointless to wait until the accident has happened to distribute them, because even the distribution process will take 2 to 3 days, even at the most efficient. So they should be pre-distributed. They should be exchanged at least every 10 years. The population should be reminded that they are only to be taken when instructed. That is the advice that the WHO eventually was allowed by the IAEA to publish in the around 2003, I think. So yes, it's extremely important, and it seems that the distribution of thyroid tablets around Fukushima was sporadic, and many people didn't get the benefit of them. So yeah, you're absolutely right that pre-distribution is the answer.
Other questions? Before we give people a second question, I'd like to put a question. You know, there is some sort of effort going on within Fukushima to watch for, to track the health of Fukushima citizens. To address a lot of the questions about whether whatever they find is due to radiation or from other causes, should the government have established a control group so that they can compare what happens in Fukushima with, and tell whether it's normal or can be traced to radiation exposure? Did the Japanese government miss an opportunity? here?
Yes, I think so. We're talking primarily about scanning for thyroid disease, are we?
I know that's one objective. I don't know, I forget the details of their program.
Yeah. Mm.
But I think they're more encompassing than just watching for
Well,
thyroid.
there is, but screening, I think, is primarily for thyroid. But I may be wrong about that. But certainly there is screening going on for thyroid. And yes, of course, a control group is necessary if the screening is to yield any scientific results. If the screening is for humanitarian reasons alone, which is really to satisfy the fears of the public, then I suppose you don't need a control group. But there's always the temptation, once you start one of these processes, be it a scientific one, then to convert it to a humanitarian one, or it being a humanitarian one, converting it to a scientific one. And we experienced that problem with the Chernobyl accident, and quite frankly, the two types of project need such different things that it's not really possible to run them both in parallel. So either you're going to do it for purely humanitarian reasons, then you are not concerned with a control group. You're only concerned with making sure that people understand that if there's something happens, they've got a diagnosis there. In terms of science, you can't do anything useful, particularly if you implement new technology, as was done in this case for the thyroid scanning. It was very much higher resolution than had previously been used for this purpose. And therefore, it may have detected things which were what we call prevalent in the population and not just incident. So they may have been there in, say, an 18-year-old from when he was 5 years old, before the accident occurred. But we can't tell that if there's just one round of screening. Now, I think with good foresight, it's been decided there will be 2 rounds of screening. The first round, I understand, is finished, and the second round will be starting soon. If the number of cancers increases in the second round, then there is a problem with causation probably by the accident. But if it doesn't increase, then what we've seen to date is the result of conditions which are prevalent in the population and not necessarily incident. So they may not be associated with the accident. So it's quite complex thing, and there are 2 sides to this coin, if you like. Of course, it's good to get rid of disease, but it's not good to operate on somebody for something which isn't going to turn into a disease. And many of these screening processes throw up conditions which never turn out to be a cancer. For example, we all in this room have several small occult cancers in several tissues, and yet in all probability none of those will appear as a disease, let alone a cause of death. It's just a fact that these very small cancers, which seem to be contained, are present in tissues. And they don't develop into anything that's life-threatening at all. So there is no point in taking a thyroid out for one of those. And the thyroid is one of the tissues that does certainly have those occult cancers. So there's 2 sides to the coin. Of course you want to prevent disease, but you don't want to impair somebody's life by taking away their thyroid and committing them to thyroid hormone treatment for the rest of their lives on the basis of something which will never turn into a disease. Another, for many of the people in this room, prostate cancer is another example where screening can produce a lot of false positives, create a lot of damage for no good reason at all. Personally, I say no to a PSA test every time.
Before we give people an opportunity for a second question, is there anyone who has not asked a first question who has a first question? If not, then we'll go to round two. Fujita-san. Wait. Okay. Yes, back here.
Hello. Hello. Hi. Unfortunately, I arrived late, so I may have missed something, but I read through the notes. My name's Gavin Rees, and I'm visiting Tokyo. I work for the DART Centre. We're an organisation that works with journalists around issues to do with trauma. And one of the things that you mentioned was the psychosocial care and responsibility of the government. And you've talked a little bit about the importance of trust as a factor in building that. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more fully and maybe talk about some other factors that you think are relevant. And one thing that occurs to me may be of interest to people is that a lot of these communities are farming communities, and there are concerns about the produce, the natural environment and crops and so forth. So if you could speak to that, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, before Chernobyl, what we now refer to as the psychosocial effect was called radiophobia, mainly by the nuclear industry. That's a very derogatory term for something which is actually a real problem, and it came to light very, very clearly in the case of Chernobyl. And you mentioned them being rural communities. Of course, that was practically all the communities around Chernobyl were rural communities, and people who relied very heavily on the forest and the natural products from there, and to be told that, well, you can't any longer eat the mushrooms for the next 30 years is a big deal. But there's also an effect on them, I think, of feeling that their environment wasn't any longer safe for them. And what other surprises might there be in store? So yes, to go to this issue of trust, I mean, trust is very, very important, and it's been shown time and time again. If you don't tell the truth at the outset, people will never trust you again. That's happened in, you're from the UK, I guess, Camelford. Do you remember Camelford?
Well, I know of it. I don't remember.
Yeah. So at first, this was a case of putting a clarifying agent into the water distribution system. And it's aluminium sulfate. Concentrated solution of aluminium sulfate is dropped into a huge volume of water, diluted down to a very low level, and it clarifies. It causes the water to be much clearer. The guy delivering this stuff to the water distribution center put it in the wrong place, so almost neat aluminium sulfate was distributed to some houses close by. And of course, when people tried to make tea with it, it was not very good. So initially, the response was, well, there's absolutely no problem, and these people are crazy, and then eventually when they said, well, yes, okay, well, there was aluminium sulfate, and it was a serious problem, and then nobody would believe them. Nobody would listen to anything they said after that. So that's the first rule, really, that once you break that rule, you're in trouble. But there are many other aspects. For example, people feel that, you know, they become sick and there's been some event. And they think, well, yeah, it's probably down to that event. It's probably down to that nuclear accident that I feel the way I feel. And they go to the doctor, and the doctor, for whatever reason he has sometimes, well, he says, yeah, well, it may be that. And then you start to build up a kind of legends about what radiation might do to you. And this is based on the fact that doctors are not that well educated in not GPs are not that well educated in the effects of ionizing radiation. So they don't really know, but they say something which they think pleases the patient. So the patient then goes away and says, oh, yeah, I am sick. So I should behave like I'm sick. And then the stress builds up, and then they do really become sick. Another route is through diet. People decide, well, you know, the apples are probably contaminated, so I won't eat apples. And so they stop eating fruit and things which are good for them and concentrate on things which are not so good. And then their health suffers. Again, they took to alcohol and smoking around Chernobyl to very high levels, and many people died of alcohol effects on the liver. So this is the psychosocial effect. It's actually not just, it's not simply the fear of radiation. It's actually the fear for their health in the context that they don't have the knowledge or the trust to know that their health is being protected. Yep. Does that help?
It does, yeah. Thank you.
Do you have time to take 2 more questions?
Yeah, I think. Do we have time? Yeah.
Okay, we've come to the end of our hour, but our guest has agreed to stay for these last 2 questions. Fujita-san first, and then Christoph.
Well, do you drive? Isn't driving bad for human health? Consequently, driving. Well, okay, but apart from that, my question is it justifiable to evacuate and kill hundreds of people simply fearing unknown effects in the future?
Well, you know, these are not unknown effects in the future. I mean, if you're speaking to Wade Allison, tell him we're still open to debate. Yeah, okay. Well, it's not the fear of things in the future. I mean, it's very real. We know that exposure to natural background radiation, most people will agree. Even the National Radiological Protection Board in the UK says that 6% of cancer in the UK is due to exposure to natural background radiation. This is not the fear of something imaginary in the future. These are real. It doesn't affect everybody. Smoking doesn't affect everybody. My father smoked over 40 cigarettes a day for most of his life, and he didn't die of lung cancer. He lived to 95.
So hundreds of people killed to sacrifice.
Well, who are these hundreds of people killed? Where are these hundreds of people that are killed?
Okay, Fujita-san, please, let's not get into a debate. Anything further to say about that?
No.
Okay. Christoph.
In the first year or so after the accident, the Japanese government allowed that this debris or rubble from around the plant could be burned when it had, I think, below 8,000 becquerel or something like that. I don't remember the number. Now, what they did then, they just diluted it with non-contaminated rubble and burned it in incineration plants more or less all over the country. Now, from a public health point of view, this obviously increases the background radiation. Do you think that was acceptable?
Well, if you've got a certain amount of, let's say, radiation dose to distribute, it doesn't matter whether you give it to a few people in high doses or you give it to a large number of people in low doses. Within limits, of course, if you give it all to one person, you can only kill one person. But I'm talking about if you give it to a few thousand to giving it to a few million, then that dose is in man-sieverts. And man-sieverts converts directly to casualties, to extra cancers. So by diluting it, if it's milk, it doesn't make any difference. If you've got a certain amount of dose to deliver in milk, you can deliver it to 1 million people or you can deliver it to 1,000 people. You will get broadly the same public health result. Dilution doesn't help.
So that was unacceptable?
I think it was unacceptable. Yeah, it's the wrong thing to do.
Okay. Last call for questions. Okay, Peter. And this will be our last question.
Having been at the World Health Organization for so long, it'd be fair to say perhaps that you've broken ranks in terms of coming out with these criticisms of those UN bodies. Among scientists in your field or of similar views, is there any kind of growing body of independent views that may coalesce into something that could be a voice that better represents what you're saying?
Well, yes. I mean, I am rather pessimistic about what has happened in the scientific field. And I feel that, I don't have time to go into all the details here, but if you like, the science establishment has kind of conceded the ground. I mean, many of them have been bought in, for example, by the nuclear industry, but also in other areas by the pharmaceutical industry, by the tobacco industry, by the sugar industry, by the salt industry, you name it. It's difficult now, increasingly difficult, to find independent scientists who haven't been associated with those industries, because universities are funded through those industries. So the very seed corn, if you like, of the scientific community is subject to those problems right from the beginning. And what I think is, and the reason I come here to these meetings, is that this is a citizen scientist organization. I think that's where the future lies if this situation continues. That instead of relying upon the national establishment to protect public health, the population, the citizens, have got to get involved and push and use what independent... There are independent scientists in the radiological field. None of them are involved in the UNSCEAR report or the WHO report, but they're there and they're publishing. And if the media gave them more coverage, then that would help as well. So there is a role for the media here in addition, but primarily citizens and citizen scientist organizations like the one CSRP, which I'm attending at the weekend. I think is where the future lies, sadly. Okay, we will end on that note that media does matter. I'm glad to hear that, actually. Yes, absolutely.
As a token of our appreciation for coming by, we'd like to give you a one-year honorary membership to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. I understand you come here quite a bit, so please come back and visit us again.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you to our interpreter this afternoon, Yukako Ninomiya. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for coming.